Welcome to Talk Cosmos, the show where Sue Rose Minahan and guests unveil astrology's ancient archetypes that continually build the collective experiences in our unconsciousness. Get ready to find your free will from your roots in the stars.
Hello, once again, this is Sue Rose Minahan with Talk Cosmos, and today is October 19, and this does repeat this following Thursday on the 24th, and that's in the morning at 6 o'clock. And remember that you can subscribe to Podcast One, that's where all the archives are, and we ourselves are initiating a new subscription. So if you look on the website, you'll see all of this, and we're always glad to connect. And tonight's subject is in Libra. We're just finishing the Libra archetype. It'll finish this coming week, but this will be our last program for Libra. And we're centering on Pluto in Libra, which was during the 70s. And also particularly because as it's coming up, we have Pluto now in Capricorn. Now, for the non-astrologers, hopefully you've been learning a little bit, I'll just briefly say that the beauty of astrology is it follows the cycles. And these planetary connections are so imperative. It's all a stage of development. And our Pluto, for we evolutionary astrologers, it's based on that transformation because soul growth is the name of the game. And Pluto is how we track that energy. And it is generational. It goes by a large segment of time, but Pluto is so ecliptic. Its path around the sun is very extended in one direction, and that's exactly why it was changed to a dwarf planet, not changing its emphasis at all. In fact, I think, and I'm pretty certain, enlarging its dimensions of our understanding, because along with that was Eris, but a whole host of other dwarf planets that this transformational energy is connected with. But that totally is other subjects. So with Pluto, because of this really long orbit that it has around the sun, not circular like perfect Venus or perfect Saturn, that just you can, like clockwork, that orbits circularly around the sun, meaning that with Pluto, it will transit a sign for different periods of time. The longest was in Taurus, that's about 30 years, and then it was Cancer for about 25, which would be people in their 90s now, late 80s, 90s, in the 80s and 90s of age. And then the Leo generation. And anyway, when it came for about 20 years, so it seemed generational until we get to the opposite, which was Scorpio, Sag, and then Libra, which, a toggle on either side. There's Libra, which was about 13 years, from 1971 to 1984. And within that time frame, most amazingly, the outer planets also transited Libra at different times. From 68 to, I have my notes here somewhere, but Uranus entered it. So for a while, Uranus was between 71 and 75, very potent with instigating additional sudden changes with Pluto. And then later, because Pluto went all the way to 84, we have Jupiter a couple of times, and just prior to it ingressing or transiting it ended in 1970. That was Jupiter, but it returned because it's 12 years. Every 12 years, Jupiter comes back, and that would have been 1980 to 81. But right then at 80, there is another cycle. And these are called synodic cycles, as SYNDOC, synodic. Anyway, it's SYNDOC. I can't visualize it at the moment. I'm so sorry. But it is that. So meaning that Saturn and Jupiter every 20 years connect, and this will be happening again next year, 2020. But in 1980 it happened, and there's cycles and cycles. And whether one remembers this as a beginner, but for those people that know more about astrology, it's like, yes, this is exciting. It seems some of the layers and nuances. And this connects totally, I might say, to Libra, because Libra is everything about relationships besides comparison and objectivity and subjectivity. To understand these relationships that ultimately get back to the self. So back to these layers of Pluto, that these outer planets that corresponded with the Pluto and Libra cycle. It was Saturn in Libra from 80 to 83. Okay, so that I've said. But Jupiter, they both were conjunct in Libra at 0 degrees in 1980. And what I was getting excited about was this is an air. Libra is air. And in that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, and you have to remember that the archetype of Saturn is stop, this is the brakes, this is the outer limits of the universe, no more, this is all we can see with our visible eye. And Jupiter is like, I've got the big picture, I understand, we're going ahead, it's a vision, because it's still reaching to go out to Jupiter. So you have forward break, or release, retract. It's like how a snake moves, it's that motion. So the point is that this dynamic was in air, but interestingly, this particular cycle of Jupiter and Saturn goes for 200 years in a certain element. There are this other feature of astrology where every sign has not only a modality, as they call it, whether it's action of cardinal or fixed as earth or mutable, but it also has an element, earth. I didn't quite say that before. Fixed isn't necessarily earth. Fixed is just stationary. It's condensed energy. It can be earth. It can be any of the elements. Okay, so tying this together, it was in air back in 1980, this conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. But up until that point, and even the last one, which was year 2000, it's been in Earth. So that's like how the cycle works. It's like almost a little retrograde or a little advance, where it was like a peekaboo, like, okay, air's coming up, because in 2020, the conjunction will be in Aquarius, which is air, and it'll be like that for 200 years. So the one point being that it's this entire Pluto in Libra era was very significant, and significant now because Capricorn, with this other transformational time that it's been in and will continue to be in until Pluto in 2024, but the other planets are moving out of it, is in Capricorn. So with that, there's a lot more to say, and I am looking forward very much to Patti McLaughlin, who is returning to speak with me tonight. And Patti is an evolutionary astrologer who has studied with Maurice Fernandez and Capacha. Some of these are familiar with you. Kelly Surtees, Stephen Forrest. These are all wonderful evolutionary astrologers, although Kelly is a little more traditional too, because all astrology lends in other directions. And Patti is an international development worker, USAID, and that means international services. And essentially, it takes her traveling around the globe. So she happens to be nearby that we could connect. And we had spoken last time for Sagittarius in 2018. So if you go to podcast 1, you can subscribe through iTunes. You can scroll down and find our talk, or go on talkcosmos.com, where we have all the guests and the information, because her particular website is astrologybythebay.com. So with this, hello, Patti. This is going to be quite fun today.
Oh, very nice. Thank you for having me on your show. And it's nice. We're both in Seattle this time, so that's easy.
Yes, not having
Uh,
to go from midnight to morning.
yes. I just was thinking about this. Well, I know we're going to talk a little bit about Pluto in Libra through the years, and then we're going to also touch on uh, Capricorn square Libra, which is very interesting these days. Um, I was thinking, I think, I'm not sure when you were born, but I was reviewing Pluto in a Libra it's every 248 years. So it is very, rare. And I did go through the history, and, there's everything from the Mongol empires conquers the Russians to different treaties. But what I thought, I kind of, when I looked at from 1971 to 1984, apart from all of the relationship issues that we can discuss, how relationships really shifted because Libra rules relationships. It being an air sign, I was also noticing how many, it was the largest and most powerful tropical cyclone ever reported. Two Boeing 47s collided. There were just all of these different air, it was
Oh, yes.
kind of these air super typhoons, the typhoon of 1,400 miles
Mm.
diameter. And then I was thinking, because you were in Seattle last night, right?
Yes, oh, yes.
And, in Seattle, for those of you who are listening, we had a lightning, a lightning
Saturday night, yes, yes.
storm that lasted, it was 2,200 strikes of lightning in
Ooh,
Seattle,
oh,
which is extremely rare.
absolutely. We might get one flash. I happened to be leaving the station and driving home. It was, the sky kept lighting up rather like a light bulb.
Yeah. So anyway, I was just started thinking about that. We might see this. I'm interested to look over the next year about the movement of airs, and even all these Boeing 84s. They're all stashed in Seattle too. You can see them. They all got grounded. So I was just thinking about this whole movement of air. Um,
It
that's going to keep things moving this next year, I think, until 2020.
Well,
So,
that's a very interesting start because I happened to look at astrocartography for another talk because it's a fascinating subject. And for those that might be interested, it's where the astrology of the sky gets laid down on the globe, on Earth, on the map. And every city, and there's a way of calculating it, which we don't do. It's all on a computer at this moment. So the essence is that Seattle ascendant is 29 degrees Capricorn. And of course, all these planets are in Capricorn. But down south, because the way when I say down south, down in San Francisco and LA, I believe it's in Aquarius.
interesting.
Yeah. And so, but regardless, I happen to be looking at coming up with some information or exploring, put it that way, is which one does research. And I saw off of LA the strong Capricornian in the ocean, the Pluto and the South Node and
Oh, and there
yeah,
was
and
that
Saturn.
recent fire
Yes,
there.
and there was that fire that same day. And I was
Right.
thinking, gee, I wonder what would that mean off there in the ocean and this tremendous destruction possibly of energy. So I think the fact, regardless, it is understanding that between air, the mutable, I mean, of course, uh, Capricorn is a cardinal, it's action.
Cardinal, right.
But the fact is, whether it's ocean and it all relates to the air of
Powerful,
it
powerful air.
evaporates into the air, and then depending on the temperatures and etc. So, at any rate, it is
Well,
something to think about.
well, a little bit about myself. I was I'm a Libra sun, and I was born in 1955 in Leo. So my son's in Leo. However, my son's in Libra, but in the seventh house. So therefore, I kind of my Pluto is also in the seventh house. So I kind of was thinking a lot about this Pluto and Libra generation, and some of the things. I think you're old enough to remember it too, is really when the women's movement accelerated,
Oh, yeah.
and when like it was just when women became really fed up, and divorce became more available, and really family structures changed so dramatically.
In the
Women,
70s.
it was expected that women, although women had always gone to work, women who of course were of lower economic strata always worked, but women who were of middle class and even upper class went to work. And this was a very new change in the dynamic of the family and the dynamic of women. Divorce became acceptable. This stigma against women, even Catholic women, it was like okay to be divorced. I think another thing that happened during
And
those times, the 68 to 75, also it became like Oprah started talking. And she started talking about things we never talked about before. And there was also this whole, I think especially in Seattle you can see it, but more interracial marriages, more interreligion marriages, and this whole idea of serial monogamy, where people maybe would be with each other not necessarily their whole life. I think it was really one of the first times in our history that this style of
oh, there's
relationship
a sound there. You
revolution
might watch
started.
that sound. That's all, Patty. Whatever that sound was. Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think it was really the relationship revolution.
Absolutely. And that really expresses that energy of Uranus. That was 1968 to 75. It's 7 years, right in
Exactly.
that time. And then, of course, Jupiter conjoined it in 68 through 70 because it kept toggling and doing retrogrades right at the end of the cycle. I was trying to figure that out. So that's our belief structure and breaking the boundaries, which Uranus wants to do, and with relationships. So it's really a perfect introduction of how, because Libra by itself, well, I don't know if anything's by itself, because particularly with Libra, it is about relationships. And so it really listens and observes and wants to find out what the other person is doing. But it can get codependent. And I was reading too, because in our generation, or at least in, we have Neptune in Libra, where there's no boundaries at all. So things merge totally. And,
Right.
and that's the one, there's pluses and minuses, pros and cons and everything, but really learning to see the relationship outside of you as external and just use it. I was thinking it's sort of like a weather vane. You see a weather vane on top of a house, not that often, but that's what it is. Picture that. And you see what direction the wind's going, but you don't move the house. You just see the direction. So you stay in your house, you check the weather vane, and then you know which way to go. I mean, that's in ancient
Right.
times.
But the house itself, with the relationships in the house, they like when you people who were born during that time from 1968 to 65, they experienced very unstable households.
Yes.
And for the very first time, it became a norm that kids were like shuffling between two parents
Or
in
latchkey.
different
Yes.
houses, or latchkey kids. And so that and then what they as I was reading more, and they say a lot of these kids also just didn't say anything, kind of tried to keep the harmony.
And that is so, it needs to be brought up. That takes total emphasis. And I was thinking, latchkey, for those that don't know, is when the kids had a key and they could get into the house. The parents were out because they were perhaps divorced and at working, and nobody was there.
Exactly.
So they had to take care of themselves. It was a big phenomena with all this breaking up. And then, too, it was totally revolutionized partnerships. Some people had children without getting married and then married later, or else just wanted children and didn't want to get married. The norm totally changed.
single parents became acceptable.
Totally.
Just really a big change. I know there's this new series out in Norway. It's called Bonus Families. And so that's what they call kind of more blended families, where you get a bonus family. So if your parents, one of your mother or father remarries and has kids, that's kind of your bonus family.
Oh, what a great positive approach, because again and again, yeah, it goes into choice.
Yeah,
And
well, it makes it so much more positive. We kind of say step families or whatever we say, but it kind of doesn't sound so uh, so positive.
and that's so Libra, because I was reading too that there's this idea of the perfect, like you say, harmony. And so uncoupling became the word for divorce rather than divorce. But really, how we see something is how we attach ourselves or integrate it. So it has value. And again, that's goes along with Libra. Thanks. That's good. I love it.
Exactly.
Bonus.
You also mentioned about Jupiter and Saturn joining in on 1980, and I kind of remember that time pretty well too. And the 70s were just so innovative and so open and so mutable, so changing, just everything just so different. And then the 80s came. It does seem like that was when Reagan and Thatcher kind of took power, and this moral majority and this push for traditional family values started coming back.
It was really the clenched
Yes.
fist. Yeah, it went from so many elements, and also, let's see, well, I'm thinking that Pluto stayed in Libra till 84, but the progressively they started going towards Scorpio, and
Exactly.
yeah, and Jupiter was the first, and then Saturn, and then Scorpio.
So I think
Pluto.
it started getting much more traditional and like a little backlash almost from the 80 to 84. It was still open and still different things going on. I mean, musically, the Clash and all these types of music and things. But I think relationship wise, it did start to pull back a little. And I think it became more conservative. And then people were going back to more conservative traditional family lifestyles.
And
I think so.
I suppose too, just looking at the bulk of people. So in other words, the baby boomers, from the Leo, were, as you were saying about the changes of the 70s, but in other words, the single life was beginning to leave, and they were having children or else getting married. Or maybe they'd gone through school and had a profession. And so life became a little filled with responsibilities and had more purpose to it. I mean, it was a natural, organic shift.
Right. And then at the end, there were all of these different types of marriages that were now acceptable. There were gay. I mean, I remember, people moved in together before they were married. People
Yes.
didn't used to do that. So, like people just even didn't get married at all.
Yes.
And so that became acceptable. The gay marriage, though it wasn't really legal back then, it was much more happening. It was much more it didn't legally become acceptable till later, but I think people were like gay relationships were more open.
Well, I think going back to this factor of the people born during that time, and you'd brought up, and this confirms the whole fact that the individual born during that time experienced this vast array of changing relationships, which really, from what I was reading, because, well, through whether it was Jeffrey Green Wolf or any of the astrologers who really started with evolutionary astrologer, that the Pluto, as it connects to our power or disempowerment, that in Libra, it's all about learning the authority of relationships and either becoming the authority or observing and not having the authority. But in that sense, and of partnerships, because here they are as children, experiencing this wide arrangement, and it didn't all work so well for the individual, but it's a learning ground, and it's their learning ground because it's all about relationship and comparison in that relationship to understand.
Exactly. And even during that time, I think just around when Microsoft was starting, and they had such young people in very leadership roles. I remember being in Asia at that time, and these young people from Microsoft would come over, and they'd be under 30, and they would be dealing with these older elders and so it was almost we broke up the whole not even just
Paradigm?
the relationships, also in the business partnership, what a business relationship should look like, with the elder being in charge, and then you had to work up your way the ladder, and it would take a long time. People started changing jobs. Young people started getting in leadership positions. So not only just the relationship of the families, the relationships, business relationships, and relationships in the hierarchical nature of these corporations, I think changed completely during that era. Those first changes started happening.
Well, Patti, that's perfect too, because relationships isn't always our intimate, it's in every factor. We will return in just a moment. This is Talk Cosmos with Patti McLaughlin, and we're talking about Pluto and Libra. We'll be right back. Thank you. While we take a break from this week's edition of Talk Cosmos, let's take a look at this cycle's archetype. We are currently in the Yang period of Libra, ruled dually by Venus. By leaving the lower hemisphere of the self, the energy of Libra enters the arena where the completed self meets the other than self to form a relationship based on partnership. As a cardinal air sign on the descendant angle, represented by the equinox of equal light, Libra's energy learns through comparison and relationships, with the intention to integrate duality and polarities.
Numbers affect our lives in endless ways. To empower yourself with the energies of the numbers that appear in your personal numerology, Liz Machette, astrologer, Reiki master, and one of Talk Cosmos' many guests, is leading a workshop based on her new book, Gateways to Change 2018 and Beyond, Keys to Navigating the Seas of Life Using Numerology and Astrology, on Tuesday, October 29th from 6 to 8 p.m. in Marysville. In this workshop, Liz will explain how to blend these inherent frequencies with future life events in 2020 and beyond. For more information and to sign up, contact Liz at liz@alightpath.com or call 787-431-2714. Again, that's liz@alightpath.com or 787-431-2714.
Greetings. This is Dana Birnbach, evolutionary astrologer, and you are listening to Talk Cosmos on Alternative Talk 1150 AM, where we discuss the zodiac, our connection to it, and our roots in the stars.
Talk radio with a purpose. Alternative Talk 1150.
Hi, and greetings again. This is October 19, repeating on the 24th at 6 o'clock, and that's Pacific time here in Seattle, Washington. And our subject is Pluto in Libra and involving all the outer planets during that time, 1971 to 84. But right now, too, currently we have our transformational planet Pluto along with Saturn and the South Node in Capricorn. So that's really giving a lot of strong changing forces to the Libran population, whether it's in the sun sign, whether the moon sign, or whether which is very strongly emphasis with the cardinal Libra, or the Pluto generation that were born from 1971 to 84. And I'm speaking with Patti McLaughlin. And you know, Patti, I was reading really about relationships too, and it was about this idea that you know, when we, because of the fact of what I'd like to talk about a little bit, and if you have other ideas, we'll just beautifully connect. But, and that's the whole point too. Libra, because I do have a Libra moon. You had said you have your sun in the 7th house, that strong emphasis. So I too, and mine is in the 1st house. So I.
Oh, Aries, yeah. Then.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. And my South Node is in Libra, although my rising is Virgo, so it's a little. But it's still, I deal with this Libran focus a lot, and relationships are so valuable because it is a learning ground. But what had been brought up was about the fact that, okay, life isn't, as we well know, especially as we go along in time, is not just one beautiful, harmonious element of beauty that we're able to satisfy all the time, because there's a lot that needs to be accepted, that, and the hurts that happen. And during that time it hurts, it's as though we lose a little part of ourselves. And it's that process of having to go through the pain and revisiting it at some time. It's the ugly side of pains and relationships that I think the Libran soul, and we're talking about in Pluto, because that's where you get your change. You can't avoid it. You have to find a method of going through it, because then that transforms. You know, it's like, and in Capricorn right now, that wants control, it's breaking down perhaps the preconceived ideas of what relationships or people, whether they're business or personal, like you had brought up the business part, or politics, you know, the whole spectrum. But how the Libran person can kind of reclaim that spark in themselves and reintegrate it is.
Yeah, I mean, I really see that right now with the emphasis of Capricorn and Saturn, you know, in Capricorn, with Pluto and Saturn in Capricorn, and, you know, indeed, you know, in the 10th house, square Libra. I mean, I would think it'd be a great time professionally for a lot of Librans. But apart from that, I think it's a time where, with Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn, just as relationships were revolutionized and transformed during the Pluto in Libra generation, you know, I really believe that right now our basic governmental institutions and our just judicial frameworks and our educational and even maybe company and business frameworks are all going to be substantially transformed. So that's what this generation is really going to be experiencing. Yeah. And, you know, we're experiencing it too.
Well, it's true. But
I'm a little older, so, you know, but if you're in your 20s and 30s, I would guess your focus will be.
Well, they're older than that. They're more like, I think now they're, well, maybe still some in their 20s, but I think more they're around 30 to almost 40 in their.
Right. So they're going to be like really making transforming the institutions and no longer accepting the governmental norms, the societal norms, these structures. They're going to make some big changes, I think.
Yeah, through relations.
And you know, it's going to happen like in the next 2 years. And I mean, even Trump is this wild card that shook up everything.
Yep.
Things are happening that we couldn't imagine happening 2 years ago. You know, whether you agree with them or not, they are happening.
Exactly. And that gets back to the Libra thought, because reading about it, it's one can, because it's Pluto of power and disempowerment. It's like the ideal, and I had not realized just the strength of the ideal with the Libran archetype because of beauty, I suppose. You know, that beauty is in itself, and Venus, you know, that rules it, is a lot to do about beauty, and beauty from the sense of the golden mean. You know, I mean, it's part of nature. The beauty survives in the world as a flower, and it attracts the bees, and the whole cycle of that energy is based on it. So it has a valid function. But the problem is that it's important to be able to not get so attached to the ideal that when the ideal doesn't happen, which again is not happening a lot, to be able to let go of those mental idealism and work with it, or go through the thick and the, because there's been a lot of loss. Pluto also is loss. It's one of the ways that it transforms. I can think of people I know and in my own family where there've been deaths, and it's really shook up a lot of personal relationships, and ultimately, with oneself, understanding the world. And that's really the whole bottom line. So I'm thinking that there's just recognizing that it is that factor, if to try to realize that there's the perfect in a sense of beauty and harmony and all of that, but yet going through the depth.
Well, I think if you look at, Libra, October 19th, that the chart of the day, it's really interesting. The Mercury is in the 7th house, square Saturn, conjunct Pluto in Capricorn. Boy, it seems like a great day for something transformative to happen in the workplace, or with communications or trade or treaties or something, doesn't it? Very, very strong day.
It could well be. And then, yes, and the moon right together, emotionally kind of synthesized because of the strength of the moon right there in the final direction of.
Right, and with the MC opposite. So to me, it'd be interesting to hear what listeners, what happens on, October 19th. It looks to me like a really powerful, transformational day. I mean, to me, it looks like you could almost get a promotion, or you could have some great breakthroughs with, like I say, negotiations, mediations, treaties, that type of thing. With that Sun and Mercury in the 7th house, square Pluto and Saturn. Wow. Looks like a good day to me.
Well, that sounds excellent. We will have to see, because we are preparing this just a little ahead of it, so we don't quite know because of your travel basis. But, also there's not long after the 19th, well, about a month later, Jupiter is going to be leaving its own sign, going into Capricorn, meaning that whole tension of the cardinal energy. Because
Jupiter's going. Is that what you said? Jupiter's going in, right?
Yes, in December 2nd. So, in other words, when you're saying this about, besides that day, just the energies are beginning to move towards a focus on. Capricorn is all about authority, all about our goals and our ambitions, and so it's really a matter of, do they have value? The Libra person will say, what kind of value does that have? Is that functioning in my life?
And how can that, and will it be harmonious? And could Libra somehow play some role in keeping it harmonious? But that's going to be very strong when Jupiter and that stellium goes in there. We just can't even imagine, isn't it? Doesn't it all take place at the end of December and January?
Well, the actual conjunction of Saturn and Pluto will be on January 12th, 2020. But then, so it'll be just shortly after, which is rather amazing because Jupiter won't have been in Capricorn very long, only about a month and a half, and it suddenly rushes right up to like 21 degrees with Pluto. But then, of course, everything goes retrograde. And for those people that are wondering, what are we talking about? That's where the cycle appears from Earth to be, as it's going around the sun, going in the opposite direction. And it's a time of reviewing things, kind of like that reword, recycle, review. But in this case, a lot of heavy, deep thought. But shortly after that, a couple of months later, in March, Saturn not Saturn. Yeah, Saturn goes into Aquarius. So because we're all at the end of these zones, so in other words, it doesn't mean that we're out of the thick of things by any means, but it does mean the crunch gets gets intense with the energies collected to, as you said, or as we have said, about our directions and meaningfulness of the institutions outside of us and what we're attached to as far as our foundation within.
Yeah, I think foundation is a real key word. This foundation, with Capricorn, it rules, also buildings and structures. And again, going back to the wind thing, I just, do wonder if there's going to be more cyclones and just these climate issues. So, like, you can almost feel like our basic structures are going to go through some extreme transformation.
And looking at history does help, although it's a strange lens because every moment is this new moment. But you're right.
And I kind of do believe, like, even the most negative can, it's the way to, to deconstruct, and then so that new construction can begin.
Exactly.
I mean, tragedy is a tragedy, but you have to it all just keeps going, so we can't. It paves the way for the new future. But with that sort of stellium, it's really hard to believe that next January really just wouldn't bring something.
Well, it will. And so, but I'm thinking, like, right off the bat, you mentioned about, at the first of the talk here, I'm talking with Patti McLaughlin, just to remind people, and this is Talk Cosmos on October 19, Pluto and Libra, that about the Mongols coming over. And then I happen to be listening to it's a course of, what is it? The course, anyway, it's now on TV that you can hook up to, and it's about the plague in the late 1300s. And evidently there wasn't anything at that moment so much with Libra. It was, but later in the 1500s when it finally, let's see, I'm a little shaggy here on my thought process.
Well, here's an interesting thought. I'm working in Uzbekistan now, and in Uzbekistan, it's the Silk Road. And right now, China is putting billions of dollars into reconstructing the Silk Road.
Ooh.
From, that took place just, when the Mongols were there. I mean, it's just such an interesting thought. They are actually reconstructing the Silk Road.
That's fascinating.
Yes.
That is.
So, just reconnecting something from just ancient empires.
And that, again, relates to these nodal energies. And again, that's the lunar nodals for people. And right now they're in Capricorn, South Node, meaning that's where we're coming from, which is, and so in other words, is that traditions of ancient times. And then where we're heading to is in Cancer, which is our emotional, but it's our heritages, and again, of the past. So it astounds me always when these connections from deep past, as I might call it, and the Mongol really was one of those revolutionized energies of the whole scope of history, coming in with, it changed the Arabian. At that time, I think they were having the golden era, but the Mongols kind of destroyed that.
Well, they went through and, but they ruled for a long time, and we have kind of just a negative that they went through and burned everything and did everything. But beyond that, they actually did a lot of fitness clubs and poetry clubs, and they had actually
the Mongols?
They had a whole civilization.
The Mongols, you mean, or the?
Yeah.
Oh,
the Mongols
gosh.
also.
That's good to know. Well, it is true.
What's interesting is maybe with Capricorn and these ancient, like Russia and China, these are old civilizations. So, maybe they're going to help us realign our new, we're at Cancer. So, civilization, the United States is Cancer. So maybe we might need a little realignment or something.
Good point. Because again, that's a cardinal sign. It's one of the points, the 4 points. We've got Aries, Cancer, and Cancer can teach a lot. And
they're ancient wisdom, and they are,
tribal.
old structures, old, you know, traditional structures,
Well,
and they're just going to be right opposite us
well,
during
I
that
also
time.
looked on, it rings a bell here because of the astrocartography I was mentioning. I saw lines going right through a lot of that area, which was a little hard to decipher because on the one current, just looking at current history with the Russia, and one knows that it's a player of course, but one forgets about these ancient
Ancient.
times that it really, in looking at it from the Libran standpoint of listening, because to have a relationship, you have to listen and you have to think objective and subjective on both parts, self and the other, could be groups and others in every dimension. So that's really valid. Thanks, Patti.
And so many types of relationships, now there's this backlash, and things are like, people are kind of anti-diversity or something, but it's like, everybody's an immigrant. And even when I was in Uzbekistan, there was Uzbeks and Russians and Tartars and Chinese, and even there, nobody's really from anywhere.
Essentially, especially as a traveler, I can agree.
But these are
I've known this.
ancient movements of people that, it's like, it's just an interesting thing. Maybe we'll get more in touch with that. I hope so.
Well, now this does bring back the plague information.
Exactly.
And
The
that is
plague.
because the fact is it broke down society, and it broke it down because half the population died. And so in every facet, there weren't the people. And there were three structures at that time. There was the clergy, the nobleman, and the peasant. And it was very
Right.
definite. But after this plague, which started in 1348 to 52, really dramatically started, but it continued for 300 years, going off and back.
Isn't it an amazing long time?
It
And
was.
was it airborne, or how was it?
No, it wasn't airborne at all. Actually, it was through the rat, and it was through a lot of water transportation because the rat came on through all these different, and it went all the way up into cities, Kaftia, I think, if I'm saying it right, in the Mongol area. It was up through waterways and all of that. And it just spread amazingly, of course, just quickly. And of course, people didn't understand why. And it's a fascinating, on the course, what is it? The course of, I wish I could remember the name of it, but it's now on television and through one of your apps for a few dollars. We used to always buy them. But the point is that therefore it broke it down so that people weren't connected with their manner. They could go to, and women too, could start working. Women even became, well, in some cases, even a priest, I think. It really broke down the structure. So what I'm getting at is, with this breakdown of the Capricornian, and we're bringing up the fact of the Libran energies just from that generation that's really moving into empowerment, right? 30s and 40s are becoming adults of capacity in so many ways, and their gifts of learning how to negotiate partnerships that have been broken by listening and by knowing who they are is very empowering, because we potentially could be, through many elements, these energies shift in different dynamics, but they're still there. I mean, it's the Capricorn.
I do think January is a big month, so let's see how that goes. And I think October's positive. Libra, positive.
Well, yes, and of course that reminds me, it was that anybody during or any days through the Libran month, these Capricornian influences might be quite evident, either collectively as it's going to the transits, or else if they have strong Libra or any Libra, depending particularly, on the degrees, that gets into because Libra does want balance, and that is, who knows, except for the equinox, it doesn't occur.
I think that we just have to try to maybe I think it's going to be some, big transition. So maybe the wisdom is to try to remain balanced as much as possible, because things are going to go really, up and down. And I think, just try to remain balanced, just and harmonious, and listen to
Well,
both sides.
I agree to a point. I'm thinking though, just that here I'm reading this, and I really going back to Jeffrey Green is important. But generally, this was something that I had looked researching. It says that people with Pluto and Libra have a good sense of balance, but because of Pluto in this sign, the whole fact that it's sudden and profound
Right,
changes, and it's in family, which because it
right.
is the in the fourth house area to Capricorn, but it also uh, unexpected changes in relationships and fears and uncertainties. But they're
Mm-hmm.
adaptable and responsible in the relationships. But relationships are unstable. So I know that in caring for an unstable relationship, it reminds me of when I cared for my father with my husband the last 3.5 years of his life. I was always trying to find an equilibrium, but he was in the process of dying. It was falling down. There was no stability. And I think that's part of the gift, is to realize that we cannot attach too much to that
Mm.
stability, because it says personal transformations accomplished by developing the ability to relate to other people. And that reminds me too of Steve Jobs. My husband was just reading tonight that an article that said just before he died that he said it's talking to someone that's the meaningfulness of life, not the millions. He had $7 billion and it didn't save him, but what found meaningfulness was that relationship, friends. And he says, if you want to go fast, go alone. And if you want to go far, go together. And next week, we have Scorpio, and it'll be a cosmic collaboration. And we've changed this to where it's now a panel. So it'll be a live talk right here in the studio. And it'll be, I think the subject's about empowerment, but it's because we've pre-recorded with Patti McLaughlin tonight. It's a little bit far away, which of course when you hear this on the 19th and the 24th of October, it won't be. But I've been speaking with Patti McLaughlin, and you can find Patti on Talk Cosmos and get in touch with her if you'd like. And we've been talking about Pluto and Libra, and it's just been fascinating. I think you have about 30 seconds here, Patti, if you want to.
Yeah,
And
just thank you very much. Enjoy the fall, enjoy the beauty of Libra, enjoy the Capricornian, the beginning of the year. And I can be found at astrologybythebay.com.
oh, good.
Thank you.
Oh, indeed. It's just great. And just to check, oh, we actually have 3 minutes. Okay, well, we've concluded that. We can, it's like, when you watch a good show. I remember watching down at Puyallup Fair here in Seattle, they had the great, oh my gosh, I can't even think. I can remember Liza Minnelli. She was, was it like, at any rate, when a show finishes, you have another encore. So we have 3 minutes here. That's the point.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah. You were talking about maybe 20, the Silk Road in China. That was
yeah.
one thought.
Yeah, I just think that's really interesting that they're trying to bring back that. So, whereas, kind of we're looking at walls and separations, and actually China is trying to build this great road. And it's going to be a train. It's going to go from like
Oh,
Russia through China, through Uzbekistan, through Afghanistan, through India. I mean, they want to do the big road,
oh, I'd
the
love
big
to do that.
Silk Road.
Oh, my
And they
husband.
want to make it quite accessible, like kind of to bring back the old Silk Road. And they're putting in a lot of infrastructure. So that's interesting if people would like to research that, because
Yeah. Well,
it's the connecting. They're really working at connecting everybody.
this is valuable. After the plague, because there was so much land, there was a regrowth. And eventually, there became merchants and there was trade and eventually the Renaissance. And, also I was connecting this with the thought of going through pain. It was a soul growth. I was reading a little bit about Kabbalah. It says that usually one might see pain as a wall. Oh no, it's terrible if we think of it as in material sense of form, but yet for soil growth, that's the beginning. And so it could be like this whole idea of the wall, like going past the connection, because who knows what China's really, the transformations globally, all our nations could be much more impermeable. Oh, I'd love to do that, Patti.
Well, it'll be there.
Yay!
Okay, well, thank you for having me, Sue. And I'm going to run, I think. And good luck with your next structure of your next meeting. Okay?
Oh, yes, indeed, indeed. And I think you're off to travel soon. So you have a wonderful trip to Bhutan and other places. And this has been Talk Cosmos. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Talk Cosmos, the show where Sue Rose Minahan and guests unveil astrology's ancient archetypes that continually build the collective experiences in our unconsciousness. Be sure to tune in next Saturday at 6 p.m. to continue finding your roots in the stars.